So I left British Airways with a redundancy package, and it was a fairly good redundancy package as I'd worked for them for nearly 14 years. What I didn't say was the perks of working for British Airways were quite good because we had a very good discount on flights and holidays. So British Airways holidays and British Airways flights. So we could buy a ticket for 10% of the price of the actual ticket, which, as you can agree, as I'm sure you will agree, it's a very good discount. So certain criteria that has to be met in order for you to get the discount. But basically you have to be permanent and worked for British Airways for a certain amount of time before you can get the discounts. So you can also get discounts on with other airlines as well, and you can get discounts on certain holidays with certain companies. So for travel, there's companies out there that provide discounted rates for travel industry employees. So it was a very, very good perk to working for British Airways. And also I always felt quite proud to work for British Airways. Well, not quite, very proud to work for British Airways because they are an excellent company to work for. And so, yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed my time working for British Airways at Birmingham Airport. And I was very, very sad to leave. However, it was time to move on. So after leaving British Airways, I began to think what I wanted to do next. So I was unemployed for a while I thought about what I wanted to do, and I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I did some short courses which would help me if I wanted to work in an office job in the future, because my computer skills were limited. Although I'd learnt a lot while I was in the rostering department, there was still a lot more that I wanted to know. So I did a qualification, and while I looked around and decided what I wanted to do. However, I did really miss the airport, and working in the airport it's a very exciting experience. And once you've had that, it's quite difficult to move on from that to working somewhere else. And a job came up working for Birmingham International Airport Company itself. So I applied and I got the job. It was working at the ID centre at Birmingham Airport. I was very pleased to get the job. As I say, I didn't know what else I wanted to do. So I thought, well, I know I loved working at the airport. Let's go back to the airport and see what this is like. So I started working at the ID centre. So basically, as the job title says, it was processing application forms for staff IDs. So again, it was working with airport employees and making sure that they came for their appointments, they got their IDs so that they could carry on working at the airport. It was a lot more involved in that, but that's basically the gist of it. So the job was working 9 to 5. The company decided that they wanted the ID centre to be open longer, so they wanted it to be open from 7 until 7. So we did hours in that period of time, so 8-hour shifts in that period of time. So I worked in the ID centre for about 2 years, and a job came up as a secondment in the apron control area of the airport. So the apron control department looks after the allocation of the stands for the aircraft. So I thought about this job and spoke to a lot of people who worked in that area and decided that I would apply for the secondment. So I got the job. So I began working in apron control, and I worked shifts from 7 in the morning until 7 in the evening. And it was on a roster, it was job share. So I was only doing it on a part-time rota. So I'd either do 2 12-hour shifts in a week or 3 12-hour shifts in a week, and that was the pattern. And it was days and it was nights as well. So this job was a very exciting job, and it was one that I felt was a real challenge for me, and it really helped me with my confidence at the time, and a lot of other communication techniques that I learned. So the duties of this job were aircraft stand allocation. So the job involved planning where all of the aircraft would park when they arrived at Birmingham. So that also led on to speaking to air traffic control on the phone and telling them where the aircraft would park when they arrived. It was also getting involved with fire alarm activation. There was security control duties, collaboration with the terminal security and airfield teams, and a lot of problem solving. So that job was quite involved, and as I say, it was a real challenge for me. I did it for a year on a secondment, covering someone who was on maternity leave. And then when they came back to work, I went back to work in the ID centre. So when I got back into the ID centre, I realised after a few months that this job was not for me anymore, and I wanted to move on. You know, it was fine. It was an administrator role. So, and it just felt a little bit basic to what I had actually been doing in apron control. So I realised that I needed probably to leave the ID centre and probably leave the airport unless a job came up in apron control. Anyway, a job did come up in apron control, and at the same time, the Birmingham International Airport decided that they were going to make some redundancies, and some of the redundancies, or one redundancy, was going to come from the ID centre. So I applied for voluntary redundancy because I knew one way or another I was going to leave the ID centre, because I'd already made my mind up that that's what I was going to do. And so I applied for the job in apron control, and it was now called the control centre. So I would have been working in the control centre, and did actually get the job. And it was a very challenging interview process. But yeah, I did actually get the job. But then I decided that that wasn't really what I wanted to do. So I actually turned that job down, and I left the ID centre. So before I left, I had actually been searching for jobs. I didn't just leave and not have a job to go to, because that would be quite irresponsible of me. So yeah, I did have another job to go to, and it was actually working for a company, a very, very large company that I'm sure a lot of you will have heard of, called Capita. So I went to work for Capita, but it was working for a small company that Capita had actually bought, and this company was called CHKS. So I worked for Capita as an administrator. Then I was promoted to senior administrator after only a very short time. And then it was just basically being an administrator, answering the phone and dealing with the NHS. The NHS were our customers, basically. And so I was dealing with a lot of NHS people on the phone, and then also a lot of the public, general public, who would actually ring into their helplines, and I would be the person that they would speak to. So I was promoted quite quickly to senior administrator, and then I was promoted quite quickly after that to special projects manager. So I was the manager for one person in the office, and there were lots of projects that I got involved in, and to do with the NHS and what we were actually doing at the time. I'm not going to go into all that now. Anyway, unfortunately, after 3 years of working for Capita, I was made redundant. So this came as a little bit of a shock. So at that time, my personal life was going through a bit of a turmoil, and then I had to think about my future, but I wasn't quite ready to sort of make the decision on what to do next in my personal life. So I actually went to work for a small company, just doing some administration work. I then made the decision to move back in with my dad, and I also bought my own house not far away from my dad, with a view to refurbishing it and moving in. So then I had another job which was very short-lived, which was working for Ernst and Young. But I really didn't enjoy that job. It was sort of personal assistant type role, and I didn't enjoy it. So I decided to leave Ernst and Young after a very short time, and I got a job as an HR administrator working for a pub retailing business. So it was a temporary role that was, I don't really know what I was covering, but anyway, it was only for a few months. And I quite enjoyed the HR aspect of the role, but I didn't want to stay on with that company. So I left that company